Everything your grammar textbook told you is a lie. Native English speakers break the rules constantly on purpose every single day. By the end of this episode, you'll know exactly which rules you're allowed to break too, and which ones will still give you away as a learner. Okay, so I said something to a French waiter last week, and he looked at me like I'd insulted his grandmother.
What did you say?
I used the textbook perfect version of a sentence. Perfect grammar. Every rule followed exactly.
And that's the problem?
That's the problem. He told me very kindly that no actual French person talks like that. He said I sounded like a government form.
A government form?
A government form. And that's when it hit me. The thing I've been doing with my French this whole time, I've also been doing to my own students in English. I've been teaching people to sound correct instead of teaching them to sound real.
Which is funny because I do the exact same thing with my Spanish teacher. She corrects me constantly, and half the time I go outside and hear locals breaking the very rule she just taught me.
Right. So today, we're going after something big. Why do native English speakers break grammar rules constantly on purpose and get away with it? And more importantly, when is it okay for you as a learner to do the same thing?
Because there's a difference between breaking a rule because you don't know it and breaking a rule because you know it so well you don't need it anymore.
Exactly. Stick with us because by the end of this episode, you're going to understand something most textbooks never explain. The rules were never really the point.
So let's start with a real example. Think about the sentence, "It's just me and him going to the store."
Grammatically, that should be he, not him. Subject pronoun, not object pronoun.
Right. He and I are going to the store is the textbook version.
But nobody talks like that. If you walked around New York or London saying, he and I are going to the store, in casual conversation, people would still understand you, but it would sound stiff, almost formal to the point of strange.
There's actually a famous case that linguists love to bring up. Winston Churchill, when someone tried to correct his sentence for ending in a preposition, supposedly fired back something like, "This is the sort of nonsense up with which I will not put."
Which is brilliant because he's mocking the rule by following it in the most awkward way possible.
Exactly. He's proving that forcing yourself to never end a sentence with a preposition makes you sound ridiculous, not correct.
And that rule, by the way, don't end a sentence with a preposition, was never even a real rule of English. It got imported in the 1600s by a writer named John Dryden who wanted English grammar to behave more like Latin grammar. Latin can't end sentences with prepositions, so he decided English shouldn't either.
So an entire generation of English speakers got corrected for something that was basically one guy's personal preference, borrowed from a completely different language.
Which tells you something huge. A lot of what we call grammar rules aren't laws of nature. They're style choices that got frozen into textbooks.
It reminds me of something my Spanish teacher told me. In casual Spanish, people constantly drop the formal vosotros or mix regional forms depending on where they are. Mexico versus Spain versus Argentina. The correct textbook Spanish isn't really how anyone speaks day to day.
Same with French. My tutor keeps telling me, yes, technically you should say ne pas for negation, but in real conversation, French people just drop the ne completely. So instead of je ne sais pas, people just say je sais pas.
Which would get marked wrong on a test.
Would get marked wrong on a test and would sound completely normal on the street.
So why does this happen? Why do native speakers everywhere, in every language, bend or break their own rules?
This is where it gets interesting, because linguists have actually studied this in depth. One of the biggest names here is William Labov, a sociolinguist who spent decades recording how real people talk in real situations, not in classrooms.
What did he find?
He found that language variation isn't random or lazy, it's systematic. People shift their grammar depending on who they're talking to, their social class, their region, even how relaxed or formal the moment is. He called this sociolinguistic variation, and he showed that breaking a grammar rule is often just following a different, unwritten rule that belongs to spoken, informal English instead of written, formal English.
So there are basically two grammars running at the same time.
Kind of, yeah. A formal one that shows up in essays, business emails, and textbooks, and an informal one that shows up when people are relaxed, joking around, or talking fast. And here's the key part. Native speakers switch between them without even thinking. It's automatic.
That connects to something Stephen Krashen talks about, the linguist behind the input hypothesis. He makes a distinction between language learning and language acquisition. Learning is the conscious study of rules, memorizing that he and I is correct. Acquisition is the unconscious process of absorbing patterns just from hearing language over and over, the way children do.
And Krashen's argument is that fluent natural speech comes from acquisition, not from memorized rules, which explains why native speakers can break a rule they technically know is a rule. They're not accessing the rule in the moment. They're just producing what sounds natural based on years of hearing real speech.
That's actually really freeing for learners. It means the goal isn't to memorize every rule perfectly. The goal is exposure. The more real English you hear, casual, messy, imperfect English, the more your brain starts to naturally produce the patterns that actually get used.
There's also Jeffrey Pullum, a linguist who spent a lot of his career pointing out that many rules taught in schools are what he calls zombie rules, rules that are technically dead, meaning almost nobody actually follows them in real speech, but they keep getting taught anyway because textbooks keep copying old textbooks.
Like the don't split infinitives rule. To boldly go instead of to go boldly.
Exactly like that. Star Trek used to boldly go and nobody batted an eye, because splitting infinitives sounds completely natural in English. The rule against it was borrowed from Latin grammar again, where you can't even split an infinitive because it's one word.
So there's this pattern showing up over and over. Prescriptive grammar, the rules in textbooks, often gets imported from somewhere else, usually Latin, or gets frozen from centuries ago. Descriptive grammar, what people actually say, keeps moving forward and adapting.
And native speakers live in the descriptive world. They're not thinking about Latin, they're just talking.
Okay, so this is useful context, but I know a lot of our listeners are thinking, great, so which rules can I actually break, and which ones will make me sound like I don't know English at all? That's the real question.
Right, because there's a big difference between breaking a rule in a way that sounds native and breaking a rule in a way that just sounds like a mistake.
So we came up with something we call the traffic light method. It's a simple way to sort grammar rules into 3 categories, so you know what you can bend, what you should be careful with, and what you should never break.
Green light rules. These are the ones native speakers break constantly, in almost every casual conversation, and it sounds completely normal. Things like using who instead of whom, even when whom is technically correct. Or ending a sentence with a preposition, where are you from, instead of from where are you? Or dropping that in sentences like, I think you're right, instead of I think that you are right.
These are safe to break immediately. In fact, if you use the overly formal version, you might sound less natural, not more correct.
Yellow light rules. These depend on context. Double negatives, for example. I don't want nothing is common in some dialects and totally understood, but in professional or academic English, it would sound wrong. So here you need to read the room. Casual conversation with friends, it's fine. A job interview, stick to standard grammar.
And red light rules. These are the ones you should not break as a learner, even though native speakers sometimes do. Because when a native speaker breaks them, listeners assume it's intentional style. When a learner breaks them, listeners often assume it's a mistaken understanding, not a mistaken style.
Subject-verb agreement is a big one here. He don't like it shows up in some dialects, but as a learner, using standard agreement, he doesn't like it, keeps your meaning crystal clear and avoids confusion about your actual proficiency level.
So the framework, in short, green light, break it freely, it'll make you sound more natural. Yellow light, read the situation. Red light, keep it standard until you're deeply comfortable, because clarity matters more than sounding cool.
It's exactly the approach I've had to take with French. My tutor told me, drop the ne in casual talk, that's a green light, but don't mess with verb conjugations just because you hear people slurring them together fast, because that's a red light for a learner. Get the structure right first, then let the casual stuff come naturally later.
Same thing happened to me with Spanish. Dropping subject pronouns, like just saying voy instead of yo voy, that's basically required. It's a green light. Everyone does it. But messing with verb tense agreement early on, that's a red light because it changes whether people actually understand what you mean.
Let's pull out a few useful words and phrases from everything we just talked about, because there were some good ones in there.
First one, prescriptive. This means rules that say how language should be used, like a strict rule book. That's the opposite of descriptive, which just describes how people actually talk in real life.
Next, colloquial. This describes informal, everyday language, the kind you'd use with friends, but not in a formal essay. Dropping that from a sentence is a colloquial habit.
We also use the phrase, read the room. That means paying attention to the situation and adjusting your behavior, or in this case, your grammar, based on how formal or casual the moment is.
There's also zombie rule, which we borrowed from linguist Jeffrey Pullum. It means a rule that's technically dead, nobody really follows it, but it keeps getting taught anyway.
And finally, frozen, as in a rule that got frozen in time. This means something stopped changing and stayed exactly the same, even while everything around it kept evolving.
Great vocabulary to add to your notes today. Prescriptive, descriptive, colloquial, read the room, zombie rule, and frozen.
So here's the real takeaway from today. Native speakers aren't breaking grammar rules because they don't know English. They're breaking them because true fluency was never about memorizing a rule book. It's about absorbing thousands of hours of real, spoken, sometimes messy language until the right pattern comes out automatically.
So don't be afraid of the green light rules. Let a few of them go. Sound human, not like a textbook. And keep listening to real conversations, like this one, because that's exactly how the process works.
See you in the next episode.